Everybody, this is AI with Dr. Craig Hansen, and I'm delighted to have Jennifer with us this morning, who's a global technology leader and also consults around strategy with technology and in particular AI. Good morning.
Good morning, Craig. It's such a pleasure to be with you today.
I'm excited to learn from your journey. So why don't you give us the backstory, the origin story of Jennifer?
Certainly. So I've had a dual career as a technology executive and an educator. I've had more than a decade in C-level roles, including in Fortune 50 and Big Four consulting organizations, driving change and transformation across global business operations and organizational culture through emerging tech. And my specialization within that area is strategy and governance, risk, and cyber risk. But I also have served in executive roles within higher education as well as faculty. I developed curriculum and a number of programs around future skills training and upskilling, so within corporate universities as well. And I have been the resident expert and subject matter expert consultant for a number of credentialing programs, specifically for digital ethics and ethical AI and data science.
So things are exploding around future work skills and ethics of AI at the moment. So what are you doing right now around AI?
So in fact, we were I was so fortunate to be selected as one of only 10 experts around the world to develop the very first industry certification for ethical AI and data science. That's been there's a complement professional certificate on Coursera as well. And that's actually going to be moving into its second iteration, which is really exciting. I've been involved in that space for a long time, and it's always been, I guess, sort of a niche academic interest in terms of that blend of philosophy and technology. But to actually see it emerge as a real career option for folks and sort of legitimized through a credential is wonderful.
That's awesome. And so who would access that normally? What sort of job or role would they have?
So it's interesting because we've seen a lot of folks who are traditionally in the technology space moving over into that ethicist view or ethicist lens within their roles. So it might be a data scientist who's got a particular interest around, say, fairness or bias or explainability or some other dimension within the AI ethics space. And so they're moving or basically looking for something to advance their career around that specialization. And so this certification, helps them, gives them a pathway to do exactly that. And also, I think, from a risk perspective, folks have been certainly engaged in technology risk for a long time. And it allows folks, even more on the business side within risk, within governance, to move into that space as well, as has been with privacy.
So for educators and for school leaders that are thinking about AI, student use of AI in planning, teaching, and assessment and learning, what sort of ethical ideas, processes, thoughts would they need to put in place?
So that's a great question. And I'll preface this by saying I'm very much a proponent of intelligent technology. I've just developed a new online course in digital ethics, and I've looked to bring in Gen AI into both the learning experiences as well as within assessment practices, in a variety of ways in terms of augmentation and co-creation within the writing space, as well as to introduce some creativity into the assignments as well. Things like historical role play and other things that, I think bring an added dimension, to the learning process. And all of that being said, there's sort of the basic on, what an educator might be thinking about in terms of that first step being responsible use policy. Things like making sure that students aren't looking to simply replace whole cloth a particular task or activity, but rather to look at AI as more of a complement to the learning process. And it's especially important around citation and referencing and acknowledging the use, understanding the limitations in terms of certain biases that might be present, all of those things being part of a robust responsible use policy. That's, if you will, the sort of the prerequisite or the precursor. But I think there's a much bigger issue that, at least from my perspective as an educator, something that is on my mind very much. And I think something that we should all be thinking about, and that's over-reliance risk. The types of risks, ethical risks, and socio-technical risks that have gotten a lot of media attention, things like bias, things like privacy, things like security, hallucinations, right, specific to Gen AI. I think all of those things are important to recognize and to be working, to solve against. But ultimately, they will be solved for. There will be a technology enhancement that will be that check and balance, right? Whether it be a fact-checking type of element within the architecture, or other types of solutions, that will help to mitigate those risks, and help us to solve for those issues. The risk that is on my mind the most is one that it ties most directly to our to what makes the tool attractive to us as being human, right? So when it's that trade-off, right? When you think of all the conveniences that might be present, you also have to think of potential laziness, right? That comes as a result of not wanting to do things because the tool can do it for you. When you think about how well the tools, and now I think they're very much in their nascent stage, but over time especially, how well they'll handle complex problem solving, we have to think about cognitive atrophy, and what does that mean for us. When we think about accessibility and how much these tools have proliferated our environment, we have to think about codependence, right? So it's that human trade-off side that I'm so very much committed to exploring from an educator's perspective, and mitigating against as well. I think there could be potentially a really profound shift in human expression, and there's I'm not a dystopian, right? But at the same time, being a realist, we do need to think about what kind of digital divide that type of concentration of power might lead to, if we're talking about that big of a shift in the writing process and how much we delegate, right, to a tool. So when I think about it, I try to think about it in very sort of straightforward terms. If I had a message for educators, I would say that there's really three key mitigation strategies to focus on. The first being AI literacy, and making sure that people understand the way that AI works, what those limitations are, that they have some capacity to evaluate the results and not just be expected to rely on them as truth. The second being boundaries, and that takes a lot of forms. It's responsible use policy compliance, but it's also metrics and feedback as well, when we think about the tool creators, and even within research as well. And then the third is around culture. And I say this because, you can be an educator traditionally in the classroom or in the workplace as well. And it's really about the type of environment that comes along with those tools, right? Encouraging independent thought, diversity of thought, questioning, challenging, and really, having the appropriate tools in your toolbox to perform analysis, right? And not just it's so attractive to just, especially as the tools become more reliable and credible, to just sort of accept, the results without having that independent thought. But the thought of losing that is also a very, very scary proposition. So that's where my thinking is right now.
Mm. When I'm doing presentations, and I was doing a presentation to over 100 teachers last week in one particular teacher only day, where schools got together, and they had a range of topics they were doing. But I was sharing and talking about the opportunities with AI, demonstrating some platforms, understanding LLMs and where it all comes from, just so teachers had a frame of reference. The jaw drop moment of seeing a unit plan being created live on the screen in seconds, and them realizing I don't have to spend an hour, or my team doesn't have to spend 3 meetings pulling together this plan, so that they can then do what they are best at and they enjoy most, which is sitting with students and applying knowledge and wrestling with concepts and understanding where the apostrophe goes, which is really challenging. Spending time using the pedagogical content knowledge. That's an exciting thing to see for teachers. If you're a beginning teacher and you see a tool like that, you think, wow, there's a great opportunity, because you can see a robust structure for a lesson plan. You can see an example of what success might look like. The risk then I was considering last week was that without the pedagogical content knowledge of knowing how mitosis happens, and how you see over the last 10 years, you've seen students have a struggle understanding that, and how you make the leap to help that student get through those 3 or 4 common struggles they have to connect learning with the concepts. That's the pedagogical content knowledge that an experienced teacher has and a beginning teacher doesn't have. So how do we ensure, even though the lesson plan looks fabulous and it's created by AI, how do we ensure that we're moving the teachers forward on that journey of pedagogical content knowledge, so they're expert in the content, expert in the planning, but also expert in making those leaps with students to help them navigate the struggle of getting the concepts. And I guess that's somewhat what you're talking about the laziness maybe that we could embed into the system.
Yeah, well, and I think, there's some natural evolution that, that technology helps to shape, our practices, right? Whether they be in the context of learning, or even more broadly. And as we, and I agree with you. I mean, I think there's one concept about, how do we take people who are novices and help them to accumulate that type of learning while still benefiting, right, from the value of the tools. I also think about, the future generation, right, where this will be the context that they sort of grow up with, right?
Mm.
And the more you delegate the I mean, we call it co-creation, right? When we talk about writing that's been developed by both a human student along with an AI tool. But and as the tools become more uh, resilient in terms of their output, the likelihood is they're going to be used more and more and delegated to more and more. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because it does allow us to shift our priorities and our attention and our focus to other things. But there's always that trade-off, right? So what happens when we delegate, more and more of human writing to a tool? And does that create, somewhat of a digital divide then, in terms of um, folks who might have the benefit of learning the traditional skills versus those who delegate fully and don't. And where does that leave us in terms of the philosopher in me is coming out, right? But where does that leave us in terms of autonomy, right? When we think about people's ability to truly analyze different situational contexts and make decisions for themselves, and even their voice, right? Even in the way that they express themselves. I think to a large extent we take it for granted because literacy is so much a part of our embedded culture. Um, but what happens when that decreases more and more and more? Um, and do we, can we maintain that same standard, or is there, a third, right? Is there a third sort of, um, blend of uh, literacies, if you will, that make up a new standard? And I think about that even in terms of designing assessment. I've always liked to use different types of assessment because people have different learning styles, and so
Mm.
just to appreciate different people's contributions, I like to have presentations along with writing, along with debate, other things that would be appropriate within in a learning and ethics context. But I think about what that means for us more broadly in society, right? In terms of workplace standards, in terms of, you know, what about when we have, I have a bot embedded in my email and it's communicated with the bot that's embedded in your email. And these transactions are going back and forth. Um, and we're not actually engaged in the conversation at all. Um, it's a very different um, it's a very different type of communication that I think we have to be um, thinking about. And in terms of authenticity, in terms of how even research now shows that simple prompts, um, when an AI tool helps someone to construct a sentence and such, it can actually not only alter the intent of what the original communication was, but sometimes it sort of reshapes the view of the user. And so as we look more deeply at these things, I think it's important to be aware of the very subtle ways in which technology can shape uh, the whole process of expression as we're using it, and as it's um, realizing greater taking on more of sort of the day-to-day transactional type of interactions that we have today that we don't give much thought to, but perhaps we should when we decide to delegate them.
Mm. Yeah, I think those discussions will need to have a place, particularly with teachers and students, as they're starting to use more and more of the tools that are AI enabled and content's being generated. Um, I think that also there's those huge opportunities for students to see how NVIDIA chips are being used to give early warning for potential, weather disasters that are on the way, or providing artificial limbs for people at an incredible sense of dexterity and strength, and give people back much more capability than they have with the current technology, and things like that. And I loved watching the video of ChatGPT 4.0 and the blind man looking at the castle and is the king in residence, and the voice telling him yes it is and why, because the King's standard flag was there. And I love at the end of that video where you just hear it and the voice says, and that's a good dog right there helping you get into the taxi. I thought, wow, so observant and so much detail that someone who's vision impaired would gain such a bigger view of the world. And I guess it will be important going forward for people to have these conversations, not only amongst teachers, but with students about the ethics of AI, while at the same time acknowledging the huge opportunities that we do have as well. Just
Absolutely.
just as we wrap up, Jennifer, what would you say to a principal who's considering, do I or don't I? Do I just keep the door shut until I have to open it to using AI? What would you say?
Oh no, I'm a very strong proponent. I think the benefits are, as you described, I mean, they're enormous. And I think uh, for me, there's no question, that um, the technology needs to be embraced. The question really is, are we doing it in a risk informed and conscious sort of way? And I think that's just the most
Mm,
important thing.
that's good.
As long as we are making conscious decisions about what those trade-offs are, and in some cases we might be okay with it, that it might be fine. We're going to, especially as the technology evolves, I mean, we're going to find, um, you know, instances where the technology outperforms humans, and that's great. I mean, we should embrace that. Um, but it's just a matter of really, knowing when and where uh, we should have, whether they're guardrails, whether they're, just more research and exploration. Whether, in some cases it might be full steam ahead, and in some cases it might be, let's take this particular implementation a little bit more slowly and let's, test it as we go. So I think it's those types of scenarios that I would advise, where, um, you know, to have a fuller vision of, um, what does it mean at scale, and how do we best incorporate those individual cultural and societal implications, and risk mitigations as we go. And those are going to be different in different implementations of the tech.
Mm. Yeah, great. I like that, risk informed rather than risk averse. What's the best way
Yes.
for people to get hold of you, Jennifer?
Oh, through LinkedIn, definitely. That's probably the best place. I'm pretty active there, so that's probably the best place to reach me. And yeah, I'm more than happy to engage and work with organizations. So, I welcome the continued dialogue.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. Have a great day.